We first noticed Asher was having difficulties with learning when he was about 5. We ended up having him privately tested, and of course it came back that he was dyslexic. It was super overwhelming. There was just list and list of all these programs. So we started talking to people and felt like everybody was just saying something different. I hired the lady that had tested him. She tutored him for a year, one-on-one, 4 days a week. She came to me and was like, it's not working. Thankfully, she had met Dr. Conway. She just highly suggested the Morris Center. From there, my husband and I got in touch with the Morris Center, and Dr. Conway spoke with us over the phone, and you could just really tell his expertise in dyslexia.
Enroll your child or teenager at themorriscenter.com, or for virtual sessions, visit nowprograms.com.
This is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network. Welcome to the Vintage Homeschool Mom Show. Your host, Felice Gerwitz, is an author, a publisher, and your radio show host. She will encourage, educate, and inspire you with answers to your most pressing questions, from homeschool, marriage, parenting, and much more. Felice loves to equip moms to live a Christian life because every moment counts. Be sure to visit her website at mediaangels.com. And here's your host, Felice Gerwitz.
What is the buy-in mentality? How do you inspire kids to cooperate with your family values, do their schoolwork, and strive for excellence? In this podcast, we're going to discuss the idea of buying in and how important it is to work together as a family. Hey friends, and welcome. My name is Felice Gerwitz, and today the topic is Inspire Your Kids to Cooperate, episode 535. You can find today's show notes at vintagehomeschoolmoms.com, and make sure you sign up for our email list. It has a ton of things that is actually are going on this month. We are going to be celebrating our 11th birthday soon, and we are going to be sending out the new planner coming up. Every month we send out a new planner for you that you can use with yourself, and we have one for the kids. We do switch it up each year, so if you're listening outside of the window of the planner that's coming up, we usually have another one. So if you stay on our email list, you will be in the loop when we come up with something new. I also want to give a shout out to our sponsor, and that is Now Programs. Their philosophy is don't accommodate, remediate. They have a wonderful online teaching program, and you can check them out at nowprograms.com and let them know you heard it on the Ultimate Homeschool Podcast Network. Well, what is a buy-in, and how do you incorporate this idea in your family? It's really simple. It's the idea of the importance of being part of a family and basically cooperating with the family ideals. So how do you inspire kids to cooperate? Now that's a little bit tougher. Inspiration's a great idea if you're inspired as well. And I think we need to examine our motivation, how we view our family, and what the ideals are that we want to accomplish. This may mean setting aside some time to discuss this by yourself or with your spouse. And even if you're a single parent, take some time to prayerfully jot down why family is important and how you can convey the idea of unity without sounding preachy. I think part of the problem is that a lot of times we focus on the small little minute details instead of the big picture. And if we can get an idea of we're family, I love being part of this family, and letting our kids know that we appreciate our own family and what it stands for, and conveying that thought, you'll have a more ready audience to listen to what you have to say. And there are so many different ways I could have gone with this podcast, but I'm going to focus on two aspects. The first of them is the idea of family and cooperation, because we want our children to understand they're not in this alone. They're part of a family. They enjoy all the benefits of being in a family. For example, love, community, support, and care. And being in a family also means working together toward a common goal. What is that? Do you have that defined? For example, as a Christian, our goal is to get to heaven, right? So we as a family need to have our ideas and goals and what we're trying to accomplish clear so everyone understands. But being part of a family is a unit, someone that you have that you can always count on and trust, and that's important. The second point I want to focus on is the idea of consequences. What will happen when there's a failure to follow through on the basic family requirements? What does cause and effect mean, and how does that factor and affect your decisions? So these two parts, cooperation and consequences, work together to create a family dynamic that works. Cooperation in a family goes along with succeeding and accomplishing. It makes me very happy to accomplish something daily, even if we don't have a written goal or list. It's a feeling of success and self-fulfillment. And many times, we as adults don't give our children that same opportunity to experience that feeling of accomplishment. And while it's an adult thing, adults have responsibilities that deal with their family, perhaps work and managing a busy life as a homeschool mom or dad. But how do we encourage our kids to feel the same way? Our kids sit back and wait for us as adults to tell them what to do. Interestingly, my son said something humorous that brought this idea home to me. He's 24, a first lieutenant in the Army, and in charge of about 50 men under his command. And he has 8 sergeants underneath him and privates. And he recounted a situation where a private approached him with a serious request, and my son answered, "Well, we need an adult for that." And the private looked at him kind of confused and said, "You are an adult, sir." He was joking, of course, and he told me this story because he knew I would get what he meant. And that is that when he was a kid, he was really happy he wasn't an adult. And he would say to me things like, "I'm glad I'm not an adult and I don't have to take care of that." Well, now he is an adult, and often we need to let our kids know that, yeah, it's hard, and we as adults have to take care of things, but so do you as a kid. We have to get into that routine of letting our kids feel some responsibility, not only for their actions, but for some of the things around the home. Often our kids try to get out of doing what they need to do. Never mind cooperating, they're trying to do the opposite. And they just want someone else to handle it, like my son did. In fact, some children go out of their way to be scarce, to act innocent. "Gosh, Mom, I didn't know what you mean." Or even worse, to feel no guilt for their inaction. Some will take on a passive-aggressive strategy. They can say yes and then fail to follow through, which frustrates us as parents. How do we explain the importance of taking responsibility for yourself and what you have to do to be part of a family? How do we convey that to our kids? And I think the goal is the buy-in with the cooperation, but I want to add something to that, and that really just came to me today. A lot of times our kids don't understand why they're in trouble. We need to make sure that they can articulate what they did wrong. And if they're not cooperating, make sure that they can articulate why they're not cooperating. In other words, make them own and be responsible for the issue at hand. Well, you can say something like, "We as a family are going to cooperate and work together. Everyone has different chores or different activities or different things they have to do, even if it's just their schoolwork or picking up their clothes from the floor, whatever that is. If you're not cooperating and doing what you're supposed to be doing, can you tell me why?" And they have to let you know. It's hard to say, "Well, because I just don't care, Mom." But if they understand the reason why, then at least you can address it. It's like an alcoholic who can't understand that they are an alcoholic. How can they remediate and not drink as much if they don't think they are drinking as much? And I think that hit me today, that we're just trying to get kids to cooperate when they don't even understand why they should be. We just assume that they should get it. Well, of course you should cooperate. You're part of a family. I have to make you meals. I have to do the laundry. I have to do all these things because I'm the adult. But we do it because we love you. So their cooperation should be because they love us as well. Because they want to take pride in their rooms. They want to take pride in a job well done. And sometimes we just expect them to assume that without us telling them specifically why and getting them to articulate back, especially if they don't get it. Some kids will and some just won't unless it's expressed. Begin with a plan and an idea about what makes your family special. How often do you sit down and have serious conversations with your family? We used to do this in what I called family meetings, at least 4 times a year. After the first few times, the kids knew that this was a place that we could sit and list grievances or issues within our family dynamics and to work on general solutions. So this was not, hey, you're not picking up your clothes. This was more of a general, things are getting out of hand. And a lot of times, then, in fact, the first time we did our family meeting, it was because I felt like I was living in the midst of chaos. Nobody was listening. Nobody was doing what they were supposed to do. We were losing, the math book. I used to say if I had a penny for every time my daughter lost a math book, I'd be rich. And most of the time, she wanted to do math in her room, which was fine if she could get it done. I didn't really care. But then miraculously, that book was lost all the time. And so then we had to reevaluate. So in retrospect, we probably should have gotten together and discussed it before the boiling point. But then I finally decided to, institute it with my husband, and it has worked really well. Some families have monthly mandatory meetings to check in and just see how things are going, to share the progress and praise reports, and to deal with issues that crop up from time to time. It doesn't matter how you do it, but at least consider doing it there. And here's kind of a little outline. So you can begin by calling it a family meeting or whatever you want to call it, and let the children know ahead of time that you're going to have this and when it's going to be, and make sure that everyone's there. And then let your kids know that you love them, you're there for them, and you have their backs. Explain that as a family, each of us is responsible for ourselves and being helpful to each other. That doesn't mean we're going to take advantage of each other or become frustrated when someone younger needs our help. It does mean that as a family, we work together. And you can explain it like this. Why do we work together? And just ask them that question. And, it's going to be something like, because we're a family. In the same way we go to the park, enjoy ice cream or treats at home, or do something fun, we all partake in it. We all live in a home that we work hard to have. You have electricity, you have food, you have the things that you need. So why can't we cooperate each day in the same way? No one has to be forced to participate in a party or the fun, but when it's time for chores, it's difficult, and everybody has a reason why they don't want to do it. But if I said we're going to have a party, everyone would be there. I also set up some standard rules for the meeting. No one other than the parents were allowed to talk out of turn, and everyone must listen politely to each person that has a grievance or wanted to discuss something in general. This is not a time to say, so-and-so did this. It's a time to say, I really don't like when we have to do chores before we eat breakfast. Is there any way that we can eat breakfast first and then do our chores? Something like that, where kids would like to see some changes made, but they're still willing to compromise. And that's really what this is about, is compromising. It's no finger pointing. It's not discussing a specific issue that someone's doing wrong. And the only thing would be, if there is an issue that everybody's having a problem with one person, then you as a parent need to take that person aside and try to get to the root cause of it. The discussion at these meetings, once again, is centered on general topics. It's not a time to point out individual shortcomings or problems. And for example, if a child doesn't follow through with a chore, you can address that separately. So this is a time for big picture. These are chronic issues that happen repeatedly. For example, the kids leave out all the toys when they're playing and everyone doesn't pick up, or they leave the table without helping, or no one comes out to help with the groceries without being asked, or if they go out grocery shopping with you, they all run in because they have to use the restroom and never come back out. Things like that. Maybe the children are instigating each other to sin. I explain that fighting, arguing, and acting disrespectfully are sins, and I just make a general statement. And I explain, sin is the absence of doing good, and we don't want to sin, do we? My husband and I previously discussed the issues at hand so that when presented to them, we're a united front, and the kids knew we meant business. Disrespect was also discussed at this time. Excessive complaining was not allowed. Some of you listening have the patience of a saint, and this is not something that I was blessed with by the Lord. In fact, I've worked really hard to overcome my hasty decisions and my temper. And I have a very low tolerance for complaining, for saying I'm sorry without meaning it, and saying things are an accident. And the problem with accidents is if a child said, well, it was an accident, and we could see that it was, we still have to explain that accidents have consequences, and that's the next step. Explain that when a family cooperates and gets along, it opens the door for so many opportunities. And then I ask the kids, what are some opportunities that we would be able to have if we got our chores done and if we got all our schoolwork done and we had an extra hour or two before dinner? What are some of the things we could do? And they could name some things. Well, we'd be able to play sports, or we can take lessons, or we can go to the park, or we could, whatever that is. And I would go through some things like, you're right, we could go to the park this afternoon if we finish our chores. Or not fighting with each other helps our home to be peaceful. And we can get a lot more done. Or getting along as a family is important because we're here for each other. And I'd say things like, let's be helpful so we can have time for something fun, such as a movie. Or something out of the ordinary that we don't normally do. Or maybe I'll have time to bake cookies. If we are upset, we can try at least to discuss things calmly. And if it can't be discussed calmly, then just give everybody a few minutes of time out. I've had to do this when I'm upset, because as I shared with you, I, have a very low tolerance for complaining. And I would just say to the kids, I can't talk about this right now, so let's just sit here a minute and let me just cool down. Or let's take 5 minutes and come back and let me just get it together and get something to drink, and then I'll talk to you about it. And so the kids could see that I wasn't just going to explode on the spot, and that I was, using self-control, because as an adult, I'm able to do that, right? And then they could see that while I was upset and frustrated, I was exhibiting self-control. And many times our kids are going to demonstrate, sadly, our worst traits instead of picking up all the good ones we have as well. The next is to explain the idea of consequences. As adults, we're naturally required, if not motivated, to do chores such as grocery shopping or laundry to keep our kids fed and clothed, right? But our kids don't have the same level of responsibility, and they often rely on us to orchestrate their every move, and it can get very, very frustrating and tiring. In fact, my mother-in-law used to say to me, well, when the kids were little, I kept thinking, how am I going to get all this stuff done when they grow up? And then I realized when they were older that I got so much more done without their help, because she had this high level of what she expected to get done as well as how she wanted things done. I'm a little bit more laid back and not nearly a perfectionist as my mother-in-law was, and her house was always perfect. And so, you have to kind of combat that if you are a perfectionist. One of my friends used to say, I'm so exhausted. I, wash all the dishes myself. And I asked, why are you doing that? You have 6 kids. And then she explained she was using her good china and she didn't want it chipped. And I thought, You're using good china for your everyday dishes? And she said, she heard somewhere that, you never use your stuff, and she was just going to be one of these people that did. And I said, well, how about use your good china on Sundays and maybe get some everyday dishes so the kids can help, or give them another chore to do. But we sometimes put ourselves in these situations where we give ourselves more work. And then we become weary, frustrated to say the least. And then it's frustrating to hound our kids to complete simple chores. So we need to discuss the idea of consequences. Many times when I gave my children a punishment, it was an in-kind kind of punishment. So I would explain to them that something's going to happen if, something bad happens or you're in trouble, and the consequence was going to match something similar to what was done. So rather than a punishment, it was helpful that the consequence needed to be what I considered an in-kind to be effective. And then my husband came up with the idea of work equity. And he began this when our oldest two were young. And it was brilliant because it works. He would say, the garage needs to be cleaned. And the children looked at him, had no idea what he was talking about. And he further explained that moving forward, that the children needed to listen. And if they didn't complete what they were tasked to do, he was going to require help in cleaning up the garage. The kids knew it was hot and humid out there, living on acreage, and in Florida, it's often dusty and dirty, especially if the garage door got left up. So cleaning up the garage and organizing it was not fun, and it typically needed to be swept out every week, or we'd be dragging dirt in the house. Or he would say something like, you know what, the weeds need to be pulled. And the kids learned that for him, the consequences were going to be some kind of sweat equity or work equity. For me, the consequences were going to be different. So a lot of times we would pull the weeds as a family on a Saturday morning. So the idea of having to do that alone was not appealing to my kids. And I don't even remember what happened, but one of my children got the job of pulling the weeds all by themselves. And so this ended up being a major ordeal for them, even though everyone had been warned. And my husband was the one who, gave that sweat equity as a consequence for what was done. And I'm happy to report that it was very effective because the offender never had that chore twice. I remember my one son saying, that was horrible and I'm never going to do whatever the offense was again because it's so not worth it. So work equity, as my husband's consequence, worked really well as a deterrent. One of my very helpful children went to help another person that was in trouble, and we allowed that to happen because we saw that as an act of kindness between the two brothers, and it came out naturally. But sometimes one of the kids is being used by another sibling, and we just need to step in. So when there's a consequence, for example, if something breaks, let's say a glass at dinner, and people jump up and get napkins and help, that is a true accident. If it happens often, then that consequence is going to be that child's going to have a plastic cup and doesn't get a glass cup. So just different things that we put into place so the kids can say, well, I lost that privilege and I'm going to have to use this device because of what happened. And so they understand that cause and effect. Even if it's an accident and the glass broke accidentally, it doesn't mean you get another glass. You can do that, obviously, it's your family. But for us, we change tactics and we use something else. Some of you would say, well, I always use plastic, it's preventative. And that's true because that child was supposed to use a plastic cup, but decided not to get that for dinner. And we let it go because when that glass broke, that child learned the reason that we use plastic. And he had to pick up the bulk of the mess. So in addition to understanding cause and effect, which I think really shapes character, we have to explain to them and use examples of real things that happen. For example, if I said, what happens if a glass falls? That child was able to explain, well, it shatters in a million pieces and it takes forever to clean up and I had to get the vacuum and on and on. And I would say, well, what happened if someone stepped on it barefoot? And he would say, well, you could cut your foot. Exactly. So the idea of consequences, the effects of them, and then explaining why really helps a child, especially when they're younger. Here's another example. Let's take laundry, for example. Of course, we don't want the bedroom filled with dirty clothes all over the floor, so most of us have something in place where here's the laundry basket. It's in the bathroom, and after you take a shower, you throw your dirty clothes in there. Or some of them have, a hamper or laundry basket in your bedroom. But what happens if a child chronically leaves their clothing on the floor? More than likely, you make your child go back into the room and pick up their clothing. But let's say it's chronic. What can you do? So you can explain to them the next time that happens, there's going to be a consequence that's going to be required, and it's more than just picking up your clothes. And you can even have your child go through this with you, or you can let them know ahead of time, or you can just pick one of these things because they've been warned. Ask the child, do you know where the dirty laundry goes? If so, have them show you, and while you're watching, have them pick up their dirty clothing, especially if they're younger. If they're older, of course, you're not going to go through this. Another consequence for me that I would have them do is they would be required to help me fold the laundry and put them away, whether it was just their clothes or their other siblings. And believe me, they didn't like doing that. If they're older, they got the job of doing all the laundry. And another one of the consequences was similar for picking up toys or giving them a pickup job. So they left their laundry on the floor. You've been telling them to pick up their laundry. They don't. You have them go pick up their laundry under your supervision and then just say, next time toys are left out by your younger brothers or sisters, you're going to have to pick them up. So it's that kind of in-kind. They left their stuff on the floor. They had to pick it up. Same thing, pick up something else. Or work equity of your choice. So a lot of times I didn't do the work equity part of it only because that took supervision. And that was more something my husband gave. Another, and this is probably one of the most irritating things a parent has to deal with, is bickering when kids do not get along. And I explained to my kids, it's sinful to bicker, and most situations are petty, especially as adults. We don't ever think that there's any reason for this discussion or arguing. But again, what are the solutions? And I had one of the solutions was the offending children had to sit in chairs facing each other and politely work out their differences. And I was within earshot, but I didn't jump in and direct the conversation. They were not allowed to yell or say mean things to each other. They just had to work it out. And if they did raise their voices, I would just clear my throat or say that's not acceptable. They also knew that if they didn't follow the course of instruction, then the punishment could be something more severe, like the pulling of the weeds or cleaning the garage or whatever else we had out for them to do. And usually we had an idea so that you're not scrambling to try to figure out, okay, what is there, what job am I going to give them to do? Also, I would explain that the situation is not acceptable ahead of time. Kids knew that they couldn't yell and hit each other, or there would be some kind of punishment. When they're little, timeout works well, especially when children are learning or just learning to manage their self-control. And I would explain to the older ones, if you don't have self-control to be able to deal with your brother or sister without yelling and screaming, how are you going to have self-control in the future for other things? Because bickering is a form of not having self-control. Have a child explain to you why they're being punished and ways to avoid this in the future. Ultimately, having to deal with a consequence is, probably the bottom line of it is a punishment. But I'd like to explain to them that this is a consequence. You are dealing with the effect of your misbehavior so that they could really understand this cause and effect. The same way if I drop a glass on the floor, it's going to shatter. If you bicker with your brother or sister, this is what's going to happen. You're going to have to work it out, and it's just easier not to do it in the first place. For recurring situations, there was the work equity or sweat equity, whatever you want to call it. And also, I used to work on the idea of relationships between the children. For example, I would pair them up to do things together. We would read the Bible story of Cain and Abel. And of course, that's horrific. And the kids would say, yeah, but that was extreme. And I would say it stemmed from jealousy. One brother was jealous of the other. One brother gave his first fruits the best. The other brother didn't. How can you please God when you're giving him less of yourself? The same thing with getting along, with cooperating with the family, with understanding consequences and what's going to happen if you do whatever it is that you're doing. You decide when you're doing something wrong that you would rather deal with the consequences, whatever they are, than do what's right. And if there are no consequences, you're going to have, as I did many times, children who continued to misbehave. I heard a talk one time that called it the threatening, repeating parent. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's me. I would threaten the kids that this and this were going to happen, and I never followed through. Until I finally sat down with my husband and I said, you know what? We have to follow through because our kids are growing up and they're not obeying and they're becoming more and more disobedient. It's much easier when they're younger if you can follow through because then as they get older, they know what the consequences are going to be. So I have a set of character planners. There's a link in the show notes that will help you with some different scenarios where you can work through some character qualities that we wish our children had maybe in a stronger or deeper way. And that's available on the website. And so, learning to cooperate is the groundwork needed for some of the other skills in our lives. And it leads to success in your child's future. And that is the topic of our next Inspire series. If you have missed some of the other topics in the series, I have created already, and there's links again in the show notes. There's Inspire Kids to Listen and Inspire Kids to Learn. And there are several more coming up. Take care, everybody. God bless, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Vintage Homeschool Mom Show. Visit Felice at MediaAngels.com and TheVintageHomeschoolMoms.com. Vintage Homeschool Moms is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network.